set the urn beside him on a flat stone and stared at it for a long time. He could still hear Sarah's voice when he closed his eyes. He could feel her hand on his. Sometimes he imagined she was riding just behind him,
where
the way she
silence
used to
hangs
on long
heavier
cattle
than the
drives.
heat, and a man's thoughts
Sometimes,
echo
in the
louder than
stillness,
any
he
sound.
almost
A
believed she
lone
was
cowboy
nearby.
named Tom
But when he
Jessup
looked
rode
up,
with a
there was
burden
only
no
the
horse
desert.
could help him carry.
Only silence.
He wasn't out there for
Only
glory,
the slow drift
cattle,
of twilight
or land.
across a sky too big
He was
for one
carrying
man's
his
grief.
wife's ashes to the
A night
spring where their
wind picked
story
up,
began,
brushing across
hoping
the
the
fire
desert
and
would
carrying
give
the
him the
scent of
courage to
creosote.
finally let go.
The desert
But
cooling
the desert
under the
had
first
other
touch of
plans,
darkness.
because halfway
Tom
through
lay
that
back on his
sun-scorched
bedroll,
journey,
staring at
Tom
the stars.
realized he wasn't
He
alone.
knew every
A
constellation.
dusty, scrappy
Sarah had
donkey
taught him
began
most of their
trailing him
names.
mile
You chose
after
the right
mile.
place.
No matter
He
how
whispered,
many
eyes on the
times he
sky.
waved it off,
I'll
shouted,
take you
or
there.
threw rocks
I
into the
just-
sand just to scare
I
it
don't
back,
know what
the
comes
creature
after.
kept coming,
The urn sat
quiet,
beside him,
determined,
gleaming faintly
eyes
in the
fixed on
firelight
him
like a reminder,
it knew
and
something
the
he
weight
didn't.
pulsed.
And when
Tom
he finally
closed his eyes,
discovered the real
but the
reason
desert
that
didn't let
donkey
him
had
sleep
crossed
easily.
a deadly stretch
Grief
of
kept him
wilderness
half
just
awake,
to find him.
drifting,
A
remembering,
secret tied to his
hurting.
wife, to love,
Hours
to
passed.
loss, and to a
Somewhere
promise
in the long
he didn't
quiet
know
of night,
he was still
a
meant
sound
to keep.
broke through the stillness.
Tom Jessup, a
Soft,
hardened cowboy
distant,
of 64
a
years,
faint crunch of
broke
stone
into
underhoof.
tears.
Tom's
This
eyes
is the
opened
kind
slowly.
of story we tell
Copper
here on
lifted his
West
head,
Lesses
ears
Down,
scanning
but
the
this
darkness.
one
Something was out
might
there.
stay with you for
Something
a long
was following.
time. If stories
sat
like
up,
this
his
stir
breath shallow.
something in you,
But the
stay
desert
with us.
returned to silence.
Hit that like
And he
button
told
so
himself
more
it was
folks
nothing.
can find these
Just
Wild
wind.
West tales.
Just his
Subscribe so you
imagination.
never miss the next
Just
one,
loneliness
and
echoing
share
back
it
at
with
him.
someone who needs
He
a
had
moment
no
of heart
idea the
today.
truth would shake
it
him to
really
his
helps
core.
keep this campfire
He had
burning.
no idea
The
that what
Mojave
followed him
doesn't
through that
whisper.
desert was
it
in
doesn't
danger.
comfort.
But
It
destiny.
simply stands there,
Tom woke
ancient
before
and
sunrise,
unmoved,
the
waiting
desert
to
still
see what a
wrapped in
man
that
brings
cold,
into it,
early morning
and
stillness
what he
that
leaves
feels almost
behind.
sacred.
Tom Jessup
Copper stood
rode
a
into
few
that
yards away
silence
nibbling at a
just
lonely
after
patch of brush.
sunrise. The copper
The
urn
fire had
carrying his
burned down
wife's
to a
ashes
quiet bed
wrapped
of ash.
carefully inside his
Everything looked
saddlebag,
normal,
pressing lightly
unchanged.
against his leg
But
with
the sound
every
from
step of
last
his
night
horse.
lingered in Tom's
Copper.
mind like a thorn he
That
couldn't shake
small
loose.
weight felt heavier
He
than
stood
any
slowly,
pack he'd
joints
ever
stiff,
carried.
and scanned
Because
the
this
ridgeline.
ride wasn't
Nothing
work,
moved.
wasn't routine,
Nothing
wasn't
breathed.
adventure.
Nothing
it was
lived
goodbye,
out there except what
the
had
one
always lived
goodbye
out there.
he'd been avoiding
Stone,
for 6
sand,
long months.
and the occasional
Tom
unlucky
was
soul
64,
trying to cross
but
it.
grief made him
Tom
feel
told himself
older.
again that he'd
His
imagined
back
it.
had stiffened,
The
his
desert had a
shoulders
way of
rounded,
pulling
and the
strange
silver
tricks on
stubble
tired
across
minds.
his jaw
He
seemed to
saddled
grow
Copper,
a little
checked
duller
the
every
cinch,
week.
and prepared
The
for another
desert
long
sky
day of
stretched
riding.
wide above him,
Before
a
mounting,
cloudless
Tom
blue
slipped
that
his hand
reminded
into
him
his
too much
saddlebag
of
and brushed
Sarah's
his
eyes.
fingers over the
He'd
urn
caught
again.
himself looking
A
up toward
quiet
it too
ritual.
often, as if expecting to
painful
see her
reminder.
smile in that
He
sky.
sighed,
It hurt
placed the
every
bag
time.
gently back in place,
He had
and
promised
swung
her
into
he
the
would
saddle.
bring her back to the
Copper
spring where their
snorted and
story
turned toward
started
the
40
east,
years
eager
ago.
to move.
Promises
Tom
meant
nudged him
something to
forward.
Tom Jessup.
As they
he
crested
had
the
made
small
very
ridge,
few in
the
his
sun
life,
broke
but
over the
those
horizon
he made,
in a slow,
he kept.
blinding flare.
Even when keeping
The heat
them
came
felt
with it,
like tearing
not
open
gentle,
a wound
not
that
gradual,
hadn't healed.
but heavy
Coppers
and
who
immediate.
sank into
It
soft
was on that
sand as
ridge
they
that Tom
crossed the
first saw
first
movement
ridge.
in the distance.
The sun climbed
At
fast
first,
to
he
fast,
thought it was a
and
coyote,
soon the heat began
too
to
small
settle
for
across
cattle,
Tom's shoulders
too
like
light
a
for a horse.
smothering blanket.
But the shape
He
moved
adjusted
strangely,
his hat
clumsy,
brim, muttering
stubborn,
something
steady.
half-hearted to
little
himself about
shadow
weather
against the
and
waking
timing.
desert.
But truthfully,
Tom
he
narrowed his
barely
eyes.
noticed the temperature.
A burro.
His mind was
No,
full of
not
memories.
just a burro.
He remembered
A
Sarah
full-grown
as
desert
she'd been
donkey,
at 22,
dust-colored and
stepping off her
scruffy,
paint mare
walking
with
directly
dust on
behind
her
them,
boots and
nose low to the
sunlight
ground
woven
like it
into
had
her
been
long
tracking
dark
him for
braid.
miles.
They'd
Tom
both
stared
arrived
for
at
a
the
long
same
moment,
spring on the
unsure
same
whether
late
to be
August
confused
evening to
or irritated.
strangers drawn to the
Donkeys
same
weren't
sliver
rare
of
out
water
here,
in a dry
but they
world.
avoided people
She had
unless
looked
people
at him
carried
with a
food.
quiet confidence
And Tom
that
sure
disarmed
as
him
hell hadn't
instantly,
left any
like
out.
she saw something
He
in
stopped
him worth
Copper
knowing.
and turned in the
He'd
saddle.
never been the same
The
after
donkey
that.
froze
He
too,
remembered her
as if
laugh,
caught
her
in the act.
patience, the way she
Its ears
talked to
went
every
straight up,
animal like it
eyes
understood
wide and alert.
English.
Well,
Maybe
look
it
at
did.
you,
With
Tom
Sarah,
muttered.
anything seemed
You
possible.
lost or just plain
She had
stupid?
spent years
The
healing
donkey
broken
didn't blink.
horses, half-wild
step
burros,
forward.
injured
didn't
dogs,
retreat.
old mules who
It
should
just
have
stood
quit
there,
the world
watching
long
him.
ago. She
Tom
nursed
rolled
them
his
back to
eyes and
life,
nudged Copper
branded
onward.
them with her small
For the next
heart-shaped
hour,
mark,
the
and
donkey
told him
followed.
that kindness
Not
was the
close,
only real legacy
threatening,
worth leaving. kindness.
there.
Even in
A
dying,
constant
she
presence,
had been gentle.
always hanging back a
She
few dozen
tried to
yards
spare
like a
him
quiet
pain.
shadow.
He refused to be
Tom
spared
tried
from.
to ignore it.
Tom's jaw tightened.
But after another mile,
He tapped
he'd had
Copper
enough.
lightly with his heel,
He pulled
nudging
Copper
him
around
forward
sharply and
across a
rode back
stretch
toward
of
the
cracked
creature.
alkali.
The donkey
desert
stiffened but
shimmered
didn't
around
run.
them, heat
It
rising
stood its
from
ground,
stone like
looking
faint
at Tom
smoke.
with those big dark
In some
eyes that
strange
always
way,
seemed too
Tom
expressive for
almost
their own
welcomed
good.
that burning
Go on,
silence.
Tom
It
barked,
fit the state
swinging
of his
his arm
mind,
in a wide,
empty,
shooing motion.
blistered, worn
Get!
down. By noon,
Find your
he
herd.
stopped in the shade
The
of a
donkey
rock
didn't
outcrop.
budge.
Copper
Tom
lowered
grunted.
his head,
He tried
grateful
again,
for the break.
louder this time.
Tom loosened the
I ain't got
cinch,
nothing for
wiped
you.
sweat from the horse's
on
neck,
now.
and took a
Still
slow
nothing.
drink from his canteen.
It was like yelling
he
at a
forced
rock.
himself to eat a little
He grabbed
jerky,
a handful
though it
of gravelly
tasted like
sand
dust.
and tossed it lightly
He
toward the
didn't
donkey's
speak.
feet,
For
not
6
to hurt it,
months,
just
he
to
had
scare it
barely
off.
spoken to anyone.
The sand puffed into
Words
the air
felt
and drifted
heavy,
down harmlessly.
unnecessary.
The
He
donkey
reached
blinked.
into his saddlebag
Then it
and
took
his
one stubborn
fingertips
step
brushed
forward.
the urn.
Tom
Breath
slapped
caught
his
in
leg
his
in
chest.
frustration.
Even wrapped
for
in
the
cloth,
love of,
that
what do you
copper
want from me?
container felt cold.
The donkey
to
tilted
final,
its head slightly,
To real.
the
I'm
way
taking
animals
you
do
home.
when they're
He
listening for
murmured
something
finally,
deeper than words.
The words almost
Tom
lost
stared
to the
at it for a
desert
long
wind.
time,
I'm
annoyance
doing
mixing
it,
with something
Sarah.
else.
His voice
Something
cracked.
he didn't
He
want to
hated
name.
that.
He
Copper
exhaled
flicked
sharply,
an ear toward
turned
him,
copper,
sensing
and
the
rode off
shift
again.
in his rider.
By midday,
Tom gave the
heat
horse
was
a firm
vicious.
pat and repacked
Waves
his gear
shimmered across
before
the
mounting
desert
again.
floor,
The
distorting
sun
everything
was
in the
brutal
distance.
now. The horizon
Even
rippled.
breathing felt like work.
Sparse sagebrush
Tom
broke
allowed
the
Copper
monotony
more
of
frequent
sand
pauses,
and stone,
letting
but
him
Tom
drink sparingly
kept
from
on,
the canteen.
steady,
He
methodical,
didn't hear the
stubborn
donkey
in the way
approach,
only an old
but he
ranch
knew it was
cowboy
still there.
could be.
Its
As
presence
the
had become an
afternoon
odd
stretched
comfort,
on, the
though
rhythm
Tom
of
refused to
Copper's
admit
gait
that.
grew hypnotic.
During one break,
Tom found
finally
himself
spoke without
slipping
turning
in and
around.
out of old memories,
"You ain't
the good
leaving,
ones,
huh?"
the hard ones,
A quiet
the ones
breeze
he
drifted
wished
over the
he could
heat.
relive or rewrite.
Tom rubbed the bridge of his
He
nose.
remembered the moment Sarah
Stubborn
told him
little
about
thing.
the cancer.
He
the way
remembered
she
how
held his
Sarah
hand
used
while
to collect
comforting him
stray
about her
animals the
own
way
death.
some women
He
collected
never felt
porcelain
so
dolls.
helpless.
Injured
She
hawks,
died on a
orphan
quiet
pups,
Tuesday
the goat
morning
with a
in
busted
March,
leg,
and the
2
world
runaway
lost
horses,
its color that
and
same
once,
day.
even Tom
Maybe
couldn't
that
believe
was
it,
why
a
this
baby
desert
javelina.
seems so gray now.
He used to tease her.
Or maybe it was
"You ain't
always
building a
this
ranch,
empty,
Sarah.
and he had simply
You're building
never
a
ridden into
sanctuary."
it alone.
She
By
always
late
answered with a
afternoon,
smile.
the first day's
"Well, somebody
exhaustion
has to."
settled in. Tom
Thinking
found a
about her
small
now made
hollow
his chest
between
tighten.
2 ridges where he
He
could
glanced
camp.
back at the donkey
He
again.
unsaddled Copper,
It hadn't moved
rubbed
far,
him down again,
but something
checked
about it felt
tubes,
familiar,
and
though
offered
Tom
a modest
couldn't place
portion
why.
of water.
With a
The
grunt,
horse
he
drank
pushed the thought
gratefully.
aside
Tom
and
built
continued
a
riding.
small fire,
They reached
more
a
out
narrow
of habit
pass
than
carved
necessity,
naturally
and
between
heated
2
a tin of
sandstone
beans.
cliffs.
The
Beautiful,
smell
but
barely
dangerous
registered.
if a man wasn't paying attention. Loose rocks, sudden drop-offs, hidden pockets of unstable ground. Tom took it slow, guiding Copper carefully along the narrow shelf. Halfway through the pass, Copper tensed abruptly, nostrils flaring. "What is it, boy?" Tom felt Copper shift under him, unsettled. The horse wasn't spooked, but alert, focused on something behind them. Tom turned in the saddle. The donkey stood at the entrance to the pass, staring directly at them. But this time, Tom noticed something he hadn't seen before. Around the donkey's neck hung a small strip of faded red cloth, tied like a bandana. Tom blinked, stunned. That's strange," he muttered. "Where'd you get a thing like that?" He squinted harder. The cloth wasn't just red. It was patterned. Familiar. Too familiar. His heartbeat kicked hard against his ribs. "No," he whispered. "That can't be." Sarah had owned a red patterned bandana she used almost every day. She tied it around her hair when she worked in the barn. She wore it around her neck on long trail rides. On the day she died, Tom had kept it, then lost it somewhere during the chaos of those early weeks of grief. He never found it again. But there it was. On a donkey. In the middle of the Mojave. The donkey took a few slow steps into the pass, its eyes fixed on him with a strange softness. Almost recognition. Tom felt something shift inside him. Something like fear, but gentler. A tremor of disbelief. "You ain't hers," he said under his breath. "You can't be." But the cloth fluttered in the hot wind. And Tom knew, deep down, this was no coincidence. Not out here. Not on this journey. Not today. Copper snorted urgently, breaking the moment. Tom tore his gaze away from the donkey and looked toward the path ahead. The ground had shifted. A section of trail had collapsed overnight, leaving a hidden drop that could have sent them tumbling 30 feet into jagged rock. Tom inhaled sharply. The donkeys stopped at the entrance. Kappa's tension. Realization struck him like lightning. That donkey hadn't been following them randomly. It had been warning them, saving them, guiding them. His throat tightened as he turned back toward it. The donkey stood still, waiting, like it had all the time in the world. Tom swallowed hard. And for the first time on this journey, he didn't tell it to leave. Tom guided Copper backwards slowly, away from the broken edge of the pass. One wrong step and the old horse would have fallen. The thought alone made Tom's pulse hammer. When they were finally back on stable ground, he exhaled with shaky relief. The donkey stayed right where it was, watching him with those patient, unreadable eyes. Tom stared back, every suspicion crawling to the surface. "You knew," he muttered. "Didn't you?" The donkey flicked an ear, as if answering. Tom dismounted, boots crunching hard against gravel. He walked toward the donkey cautiously, not wanting to spook it. The closer he moved, the clearer the bandana became. Faded. Worn. Dusty at the edges. But the pattern, the tiny blue stitching Sarah loved, that was unmistakable. He reached out slowly. Where did you get this?" His voice cracked. The donkey didn't move. It just lowered its head, letting him untie the old cloth. Tom held it in his hands, the desert blurring around him. His chest tightened. Memories poured in, Sarah laughing as she tied it around her neck. Sarah wrapping it around his wrist during a storm. Sarah using it to bandage a foal's cut leg. Tom inhaled deeply, the faintest trace of her scent still clinging to the fabric, buried beneath dust and time. "How in God's name?" He pressed the cloth against his forehead. Grief hit him harder than the desert sun ever could. "You can't just show up with this. Not out here. Not now." Copper snorted behind him. The donkey stepped forward a few inches, slow, deliberate. Tom wiped his eyes roughly, annoyance at his own vulnerability mixing with the shock. "All right," he said, steadying himself. "Let's see who you are." He crouched beside the animal, and gently brushed aside the dry fur on its shoulder. At first, he saw nothing but dust. Then a tiny mark emerged beneath the hair. Faint. Half-healed. A brand. Tom froze. It was a small heart. Sarah's heart. Her sanctuary brand. He sat back in the sand, the wind knocking dust around his boots. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even think. He just stared at that heart-shaped brand, disbelief and recognition crashing together like thunder. This donkey had belonged to Sarah. Not belong. Been saved by her. Healed by her. Loved by her. And now, somehow, impossibly, it had found him. Tom rubbed his forehead, trying to pull sense out of something too strange to understand. "She must have taken you in at some point. One of her rescues." His voice softened. "But you weren't there in the last months. She never mentioned you." The donkey brayed softly, almost regretfully. Tom felt a strange ache, hope mixed with sorrow, gratitude mixed with confusion. He looked at the bandana again, then at the brand, then at the animal standing before him like a ghost from Sarah's last good years. "How did you find me?" he whispered. The desert didn't answer. The donkey just blinked, long lashes catching sunlight, as if the question didn't matter. As if the only thing that mattered was that it had arrived. Tom let out a shaky sigh and stood up. He wiped the dust from his hands, then gave the donkey's cheek a tentative stroke. The animal leaned into it without hesitation. "You're a strange one," he murmured. "A stubborn one, just like her." He couldn't explain it. He didn't try. Something in him just shifted, a quiet understanding, like a door inside him had opened that he thought was permanently locked. He returned to Copper and carefully tied the bandana around his wrist. The cloth fluttered in the dry wind. A piece of Sarah back on the trail with him. It was the first time since her death that he felt something close to comfort. Not peace, but maybe the beginning of it. The donkey followed behind as Tom led Copper around the collapsed pass, taking a much longer route that cost them hours. The trail was harder than he'd expected. Sharp stones. Loose dust. Narrow ledges. The humbling kind of terrain that reminded a man how small he was. Every time Tom checked over his shoulder, the donkey was there. Never lagging. Never wandering. Quiet. Determined. Like it had somewhere important to take him. They reached open desert again by late afternoon, the sun dipping lower but still hot as iron. Tom mounted Copper and continued riding. The donkey kept pace on foot, unbothered by the distance. Occasionally it trotted ahead, then circled back. Almost as if scouting. Finally, Tom said aloud what he'd been thinking for hours. "You ain't following me, are you?" He glanced at the donkey. "You're leading me." The donkey didn't respond. But an odd certainty settled into Tom's gut. There was something intentional about the way it moved. Purposeful. Like it knew where they were supposed to go. Like it had waited for Tom to arrive in the desert at this exact moment. As the sun dipped into gold and bronze across the sky, the donkey suddenly stopped. Tom slowed Copper to a halt. "What now?" The donkey turned its head and brayed loudly for the first time all day. A sharp, almost urgent sound. Then it stepped toward a cluster of broken rock formations off the main trail. Tom frowned. "What's over there?" The donkey brayed again. Copper shook his head uneasy. "All right," Tom said. "I'm coming, Dot." He dismounted and followed the donkey through a narrow gap between two slabs of rock. The air cooled as shadows thickened. Every step echoed softly. The narrow path opened into a hidden basin, a shallow pocket of desert rarely touched by sun. Tom froze. At the far end of the basin lay a small makeshift structure, half rock, half old wooden planks. Something between a shelter and a hiding place. His heart dropped into his stomach. He walked forward slowly, dread and curiosity tangled in his chest. The donkey stayed close behind, its presence strangely grounding. Inside the shelter, Tom found a battered canvas bag. Torn at the top. Weathered. Familiar. He knelt down, lifted it, and felt a lump inside. His breath caught. He opened the bag. Inside, wrapped in another piece of cloth, was Sarah's journal. He hadn't seen it since the day she died. It had vanished from their home weeks before her passing. He turned the house upside down looking for it, thinking it held her last thoughts. He'd never found it. Until now. His hands trembled as he flipped open the cover. Sarah's handwriting filled the first page. He whispered her words aloud, barely breathing. "I hope this finds you when you're ready, Tom." He sat down hard, knees buckling beneath him. The donkey lowered itself beside him, quiet and still. Tom held the journal to his chest. Everything inside him cracked open, the grief, the longing, the anger, the love. It all poured out of him like the desert had split his heart wide open. How did you know?" he whispered to the donkey. But he wasn't asking the donkey. He was asking her. Asking the desert. Asking the sky. The donkey nudged his arm gently, as if urging him on. Tom swallowed the lump in his throat and opened the journal again. There, written in Sarah's shaky, late-year handwriting, was a single line circled in pencil. "If you ever lose yourself, follow where kindness leads you." Tom wiped his eyes. He looked at the donkey. And finally understood. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't chance. Sarah had left him a guide. A living reminder. And the journey wasn't over yet. Tom sat in the shadowed basin for a long while, holding Sarah's journal like it was the last fragile piece of her left in the world. The donkey rested beside him, head lowered, as if keeping watch. Copper stood at the entrance to the rock pocket, quietly alert but unusually calm. It was the kind of scene that didn't belong to the desert's harsh nature. It felt protected, held, almost sacred. When Tom finally gathered the strength to turn the first page, his hands trembled. The journal was worn, the ink faded in places, the edges frayed. Some pages held small smudges of dirt, probably from Sarah's hands as she rode out on the range. He could almost see her sitting on the porch of the ranch, journal balanced on her knees, writing while the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe through the ache in his chest. Sarah's first entry wasn't dated. She'd never cared for formalities. It read, "When you love someone deeply, you learn the shape of their silence. I can feel yours already, Tom. And if I'm right, you won't know how to carry mine when I'm gone." Tom closed his eyes. His breath hitched. For months, he had been a walking echo, carrying silence like a burden. She had known. She had always known. He kept reading. "I don't want my leaving to turn your world into a graveyard. I want you to remember the spring, the place where we almost said goodbye that first night but ended up saying everything else instead. If you bring me back there, I'll feel like I'm home. Not gone. Just resting." Tom touched the copper urn still secured in his saddlebag. Resting. He'd never thought of it that way. The next entry changed the rhythm of his heartbeat. "I have a feeling one of my rescues will outlive me. The little donkey with the scar on his flank, you remember him. The one who wouldn't let me close at first, then never left my side after I stitched him up. Animals remember kindness better than people do. I hope he stays gentle. I hope he finds someone who needs him as much as he needed me." Tom stared at the donkey in disbelief. Its flank, the small stitched scar, he hadn't noticed it earlier in the shade. But now he saw it clearly. A jagged line, almost hidden under coarse hair. A scar Sarah had healed. He whispered, voice hoarse, "You were hers. You stayed with her." The donkey nudged his shoulder softly, almost apologetic. Tom turned the page. The entry was shorter this time, written shakier. "If the donkey ever finds you, trust him. He knows the way." Tom shut the journal, pressing it against his chest. Tears blurred the desert before him, turning sand and stone into wavering shadows. He didn't know how long he sat there before the donkey nudged him again, gentle, insistent. "All right," he murmured, wiping his eyes. "I'm coming. Let's finish this." He stood, joints stiff, heart raw. He tucked the journal safely back into the canvas bag and secured it to Kappa's saddle. Then he placed the bandana, Sarah's bandana, around his wrist again, tying it tighter this time, like a promise. The donkey stepped beside him, ready. "So," Tom said quietly, "you're lead in the way again." The donkey brayed softly, then turned toward the eastern ridge. Together, they left the basin behind. The desert stretched ahead, vast and golden under the setting sun. The heat softened. Wind swept gently across the plains, carrying hints of sage and dust and something Tom hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was a half-day's ride to the spring. Tom didn't rush. The journey felt different now, less like a burden, more like a pilgrimage. Every mile carried memory. Every ridge carried meaning. The donkey walked beside Kappa the whole way, matching pace with surprising loyalty, as if determined not to let Tom slip into the loneliness that had followed him for months. Tom talked more than he had since Sarah died. Not full conversations, just quiet words. Memories. Confessions. Regrets. The donkey listened like a patient old friend. Near sunset, the land dipped into a familiar slope. Tom recognized the terrain immediately, sandy ridges giving way to a shallow valley of mesquite and desert brush. His breath caught. "We're close," he whispered. The donkey brayed once, almost celebratory. They crested one final rise, and there it was. The spring. Small. Unassuming. But beautiful in its stubborn persistence. A trickle of clear water pooled into a shallow basin surrounded by wild grass and scattered stones. The place where Tom had met Sarah. The place where two wandering souls had shared a meal, a laugh, a story, and unknowingly started a lifetime. Tom dismounted. His legs went weak, but he didn't fall. He walked toward the water slowly, each step heavier than the last. Copper followed behind, quiet. The donkey walked to Tom's side, matching him stride for stride. At the water's edge, Tom sank to his knees. His hands shook as he reached for the saddlebag. For the urn. He held it close for a long time, forehead resting on the cool metal. His voice was barely a whisper. "I brought you home, Sarah." He opened the urn. The wind paused, as if the desert itself knew to be still. Tom tipped the urn gently, letting the ashes spill into the spring, into the water, into the earth that had brought them together decades ago. They spread slowly, gracefully, mingling with the ripples. Tom exhaled shakily. Not a breath of pain this time. A breath of release. The donkey pressed its head against his shoulder. Copper lowered his head toward the water, silent and respectful. Tom looked up at the sky. Brilliant oranges and pinks streaked across stretching clouds. For the first time in 6 months, the colors looked like colors again. Not muted. Not faded. Real. He felt Sarah everywhere. In the wind. In the spring. In the warmth on his face. In the soft donkey breathing beside him. "Thank you," he said softly, not sure if he was speaking to Sarah, or the donkey, or the desert itself. He tied the bandana around a nearby willow branch, letting it flutter next to the water like a flag of memory. The donkey stepped forward, lowering its head as if bowing. Tom ran a hand down its neck. "You're stayin', aren't you?" he whispered. The donkey looked back at him, eyes gentle. And in them, Tom saw something he hadn't seen in months. A beginning instead of an ending. He let out a long breath and stood. "All right," he said. "Let's head home." But the moment he turned away from the spring, he realized something important. He wasn't leaving alone. He'd arrived with grief. He left with a companion. A guide. A reminder that kindness carries on long after the hands that created it are gone. Tom touched the journal on Kappa's saddle one more time, then mounted up. The donkey fell in at his side, steady as a heartbeat. And as the last light of day spread across the wild western sky, Tom Jessup, broken, healed, changed, rode forward into the open desert. Not as a man losing the past, but as a man finally strong enough to carry love into the future.